Welcome to the Serrano Brothers podcast. We are twin brothers who are pastors in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. We talk about faith, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, culture, and anything else we think is interesting. Thanks for joining.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back. We are interviewing pre-nominees for the office of bishop in the Sierra Pacific Synod. And today we have the Reverend Jeff Johnson on. Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
It's great to see you guys.
Could you tell us first where you're serving and what conference you're in?
I'm in the Bridges Conference, which is kind of the East Bay, and it goes across all the bridges in the Bay Area. And I serve as the pastor at University Lutheran Chapel in Berkeley, which is the university church at the University of California. So we're yeah.
And you're being kind of modest here, Pastor Jeff. You also work at Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary.
I do. I work with you, and I have worked with Josh on the spiritual care team at PLTS, and I've been a part of that team for maybe the past 10 years. And it has been a really great joy in my life to be a part of this mentoring and conversation with students and faculty and staff. And I'm really grateful to Phyllis Anderson, who initially gave me the opportunity to be on the team, and to Ray and Alicia and all of the leaders at PLTS who allow me to continue to be on the team. And it gives me the chance to work alongside people like you. And I'm very grateful for that. And we're in different conferences, so we wouldn't see each other all that often on a regular basis. And we see each other, Jeremy, you and I see each other during the school year weekly, which is a really great thing. Josh, we miss you on the team.
I really loved being on that team. That was really great.
My gosh, it was fantastic. Yeah.
Well, Pastor Jeff, we want people to get to know you, and I think one of the ways that do, rather than just saying, tell us about your childhood or something like that, rather than, I got a specific question for you.
Right.
Can you tell us what your favorite childhood memory is, either inside the church or outside the church?
Yeah, definitely. It's outside the church. My favorite childhood memory is summer vacation. We grew up in Southern California. My parents bought a new house that was being built at the edge of a suburb in Simi Valley. And behind us, there was open, undeveloped space. And because it had been a construction zone, there was all kinds of leftover construction materials. So every summer of my childhood growing up, until that property was then built out, I don't remember when that was, every summer we would go to that open space and build cities, forts, stuff. That's my favorite memory of childhood. I spent no time sitting at home, and all of my time on my bicycle and building stuff in these vacant spaces behind our house with my siblings. I have a younger sister and a younger brother, and with all the neighborhood children who lived on this street.
Really cool. That's awesome.
No, it's super cool. And I think it comes from I had an erector set. I don't even know if they make those anymore, but I grew up with an erector set, and I grew up with more Legos than would fit into any kind of box. So I had this, I was kind of this little builder. I built lots of stuff and loved forts.
That's cool. A lot of times people don't know, like fast forward to today, like what pastors do kind of in their off time. Do you have any like hobbies or interests that you pursue outside of outside the church?
Yeah, no, I have no hobbies. I work 100% of the time.
Oh, so
yeah. I have lots of hobbies, and it's difficult sometimes to find time for them. we just got back. My husband and I just got back from a trip that we took with my parents. My parents are in their mid-80s, and we try each summer to go someplace with them.
Oh, nice.
And so traveling is a hobby. But I think probably the most interesting thing that I love to do is ancestor work. So I have a tree. It's not very big. It's about 2,800 people. And I'm not really interested in numbers of people on my tree. I'm interested more in the stories that I can dig up on people in my tree. So for example, last year when I was on sabbatical, I discovered that my grandmother, who was a first generation Danish immigrant, her parents both came from Denmark on my mother's side, and my grandmother on my grandmother's mother on my father's side, that they both of my grandmother's mothers died in childbirth. And I discovered this right at the time when we were having these kind of crazy debates in our country about prenatal care and choice and all of these things. And to have two women in my family who were, a couple of generations removed, die in childbirth, brought that, political conversation home to me in a way. So I like to dig into stories, into family stories, family histories, and uncover joyful details and also complicated details of the lives of my ancestors, details that made them who they were, and
that's awesome.
Made me who I am. So ancestry work, travel, and building. I continue to build. I continue to do stuff around the house and build decks and all kinds of things.
Your house is the only house I've ever been jealous of, where you can control all of the lights with your voice. That is the coolest thing I have ever seen.
Sometimes it works, but it can be very frustrating because these little light switches take forever to update, and so sometimes you can't control any lights. But when it's working, it's very fun, and that's I love gadgets, and that's just my husband is not as much of a fan as the gadgets as I am. So yeah.
He's like, I just want to turn it on. I just want to turn on the light
exactly,
switch.
Exactly.
I don't want to talk to the house. Just turn it on the light switch.
He'll walk around the house and he'll say, turn on all the lights now. And it drives me nuts. But the house lights up, and it's very cute.
Does it work in Spanish too?
It does not work in Spanish. Great. It's a good thing. My Spanish is really poor, but yeah.
So you got vacation, you have building, you have gadgets, and and that's great for off time. What do you do? What spiritual practice do you cling to, and do you find yourself coming back to over and over again, that really connect you to God?
Yeah, that's a great question. My primary spiritual practice is the Eucharist, and it's the place where I know the unconditionality of God's love for me in my deepest despair, in my deepest struggle, at the moment of my greatest challenge or self-doubt, or it was prior to the pandemic, I couldn't have imagined a week without the Eucharist, and I think that was the most difficult time for me. We fasted from Eucharist as a community during sequester, so we then celebrated Eucharist when we were all able to come back together, and it was was incredibly painful for me, and I had to develop other ways of finding deep encounter with God's unconditional love. We developed practices of morning prayer during the pandemic that we hadn't developed, or that we hadn't kind of used prior, and that was incredibly connecting for me, and it was such a relief when we were able to come back together and share bread and wine together and know from the inside that God's love is for us. So Eucharist is my primary spiritual practice. I do lots of other things. I go for walks. I crave time where I'm not thinking or reading or speaking, but just sitting in silence or being in silence. I need that time. I have an extroverted side that I've developed, but I'm a pretty strong introvert, and so I need time to recreate just by myself. And during those times, I know and am enveloped by the loving kindness I know at the center of God, but it's really Eucharist, which is my primary spiritual practice.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much that's a great, I love that answer. Do you ministries has its highs and its lows, and I think that we should really hold on to our successes in ministry, and really, could you tell us a time where you did something that was successful in ministry and that you really love that you were part of that thing?
Yeah, there are really lots of moments in ministry that have created a joy for me. I am really privileged to be. I've been the pastor of two communities: the community here at the chapel in Berkeley and the community of First United Lutheran Church in San Francisco, both of which are small communities and are creative, experimental communities liturgically and at work in the world. They take seriously our connection to neighbors and the change that we seek in the world around us. Both of them do that. And so there are lots of examples about things that brought deep joy into my life, joy that I wouldn't have accessed otherwise. The one that pops to mind right now is our creation of a network of Lutheran volunteer corps houses in the East Bay. Shortly after I came to the chapel, we served the University of California, and we were in, at that point, relationship with the Episcopal Church. The Episcopal Church had a service corps house in the Berkeley Flatlands, but there were no Lutheran volunteer corps houses out on the West Coast, south of Seattle, Tacoma, and we thought there should be. LVC wasn't interested in expanding. They didn't think they had the capacity, but we were really interested in helping them understand that LVC houses could really make a difference in our area, and we're successful. The Vesper Society gave us a little grant of money to organize. We organized LVC. We organized 3 houses out here, and eventually they were incorporated into the network. And it was such joy to watch LVC move from a definite no to a yes, and for these houses to happen, and for the synergy that developed between the LVC houses and the Episcopal Service Corps House, and the campus ministries, Episcopal and Lutheran at Cal. It was fantastic. So that is a success among many joys that I've experienced in ministry and continue to experience in these experimental, creative, small, liturgically centered Lutheran communities that I've served.
Thanks.
Hmm.
All right, so we're changing lanes on you now.
All right, here we go. I'll turn around.
There are three expressions of the church, right? There's the church-wide office, the synod, and then the congregation.
I thought you were going to say sad, sadder, and saddest, but that's okay. Yeah.
Well, there doesn't seem to be that ethos right now, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of doom and gloom out there right now.
Right.
And so in your understanding, what's the function of the synod office?
Oh, I think it's really simple. I think the synod office is the place that helps congregations and ministries. I think sometimes we get too focused on congregations, but congregations and ministries in this area, congregations, ministries, regions in this area connect with resources and pastors, and the synod office helps to support congregations, ministries, and regions in the work that we do. So I think the synod office doesn't need to be huge. I think we can have a kind of efficient, a well-run, a smaller synod office. We have a lot of territory in our synod, which is kind of difficult. The bishop and the office travel a lot, but I think it's to connect congregations, ministries, and regions with one another, with resources, and with pastoral staff, with rostered ministers, with pastors and deacons in our church. There is a function of the synod office that we don't often think about, and that I think is to connect our area with other areas. And we can do that through the church-wide expression. We think of the church-wide expression as Chicago, as Higgins Road, as this location in an office building close to the airport. But I think the church-wide expression is more than that. I think it's our relationships with each other. So, for example, when the hurricane was bearing down on Los Angeles, we were finding ways to try to connect with people we knew in the synod that where Los Angeles is located, or when the fire happened on Maui, on the island, we were trying to find ways to connect with a different synod, a different area, down in Southern California, in San Diego and Hawaii. So I think the church-wide expression tries to connect these areas to one another, and I think we do that through the synod office. I think the synod office helps make that happen. So
That's good.
I think the bishop is a connector between ministries, regions in our area, and a connector between other bishops and leaders nationally. And then you can also think internationally, but that's beyond the three expressions.
Right. Yeah. Let me follow that. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Jerry.
I was gonna say, let me follow that up, Pastor Jeff. My kind of read on our synod is that we are disconnected. Churches are disconnected from each other. And how do you see the synod office being able to, and you as the bishop making those connections?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been in the synod for over 30 years, since my ordination in San Francisco. And people have always talked about our synod being disconnected, and they've talked about it as a geographical issue. They've talked about it as a political issue. The Bay Area split from the Central Valley. They've talked about it as a political issue, conservative, liberal. And there have been a variety of responses. There was some time in our synod when we tried to solve the problem of disconnection by establishing synodical offices in different places. I'm not sure that worked very well. There was another time where we had Synod staff members who were living in different places, and trying to make. I think recently we've changed course, and we're trying to empower regional deans, conference deans, and I think there's an answer to the problem of disconnection in that direction, where the Synod office doesn't answer the disconnection problem, but we build connections on a regional level, on a conference level, and the Synod office helps to make that happen. So resources have been freed up to help pay deans. We've never paid deans before, but we now offer deans a small stipend to do some work regionally. And I think that's going to help immensely with the problem of disconnection. In our area, there are a group of 4-5 clergy. There are clergy in our area that gather weekly for text study. And that's been happening for a long time, and that builds relationships and connections. But this group has decided that we're creating a hub space together to do work together that's not text study. We gather around a table on a regular basis. We all are doing our work, and the synergy that happens when we're in the same work hub around the same table is incredibly interesting. We're now doing programs jointly in a way that we hadn't really before. We're having joint worship services in a way that we hadn't before. All of that helps with the problem of disconnection. And so I think we're headed in the right direction. I don't think we solve disconnection with bureaucracy. I think we solve disconnection with relationships, and all of those things start locally. It's not, the Synod office can't figure this out, but we can figure this out together, locally, regionally, and the Synod office can help that to happen, and make that possible.
Yeah, that's good. I think that goes into this next question that I was going to ask is, you said in your paperwork, you quoted Thomas Friedman, which I thought was awesome because I like Thomas Friedman too, that everything everywhere is going to change all at once. And then you said resiliency is our principal challenge if we're going to weather the dramatic change that's happening around us. How does that take flesh in the bishop's office? How are you going to embody in this Synod office and cultivate resilience, both in the Synod office and amongst congregations? How's that going to work out?
How's that happen? Yeah, that's a great question. I think resiliency, as opposed to some of the unhealthy patterns that have taken root in our Synod. So it's no surprise to everyone that denominations are having a hard time of it. It's not just Lutherans. Yeah. Churches are having a hard time of it. There's the trust issue. There's the transparency. There are all kinds of reasons. There's a professor at Santa Clara University who has said that the church is in the process of right sizing. That we kind of had ballooned in the 50s and 60s, and it's taken us a couple of decades to right size. I like that idea that we were kind of inflated, and now we're going back to essentials. Now more than ever, as things are changing radically and rapidly around us, I think we have to be more efficient, more flexible, and we have to stop doing things like eating up small congregations just to pay for the lights, which is what we do now, right? We sell small congregations when they dwindle. We sell off their property to fund the Synod budget or to fund some new ministry idea. And I don't think that's resilient. I don't think it's sustainable. I don't think it will set us up for the future. I think instead we need to create uh, uh, sustainable sources of revenue to cover kind of basic bureaucratic costs to help with dwindling financial resources. I don't think we should just spend it. I think we should manage the resources that we've been given, because the future is going to be harder than the present, and the present is hard enough. So I think the Synod office can set a tone that doesn't exist right now. Can set a tone and can make sure that regions have options that are more than simply closing up shop and dwindling, but that will build more robust connections on a regional level, that will create resources for ministry that exist into the future, that will help those of us who are currently worshiping connect with others, but preserve something for those who come after us. Because I think we're gonna get hit with things that we can't anticipate, and we can plan that it's going to be harder, and I think we need to be more robust in this system that we create. That the last thing I would say is, you talked about the three expressions earlier: congregation, synod, churchwide, and I'm a fan of congregations. I think ministry happens in congregations, and I don't think congregations exist in silos. I think congregations exist in networks, and I think we have to strengthen those networks. And we might call them conferences or neighborhoods or regions, but right now our networks aren't strong enough. And when one congregation's in trouble, we let it die instead of helping it to find its way back to the center of the network, right? And maybe its death or its transformation makes the network stronger. So I think focusing only on congregations is part of the problem. I think we have to focus on the network of congregations and make that network stronger.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about having that sort of network idea there. I can tell you from like my own congregation, when I talk that way, I don't use the network language, but it's so hard to get members to understand that, like, maybe merging with another congregation is the best plan. When they baptized all their kids at that baptismal font, or
Right.
stood at that altar for their wedding day, and I think that's a challenge that we also face, on the individual and the synod level, on the local congregation, and is trying to help people imagine a future. And so I'm really glad that you talked about the future of the synod, and not just, a 5-year plan, but like, what is our synod going to look like in 25 years? Right. Like, and I think there's what my congregation was established in 1947. They were thinking 50 years in the future. You know what I mean? And I wonder if, because of the, like you said, the right sizing of church now, if we've stopped thinking 50 years in the future, and if we need to get back to that, you know what I mean?
I think two things, right? I do think that a lot of us we can't see past 5 years from now. We actually don't believe that there's a future for the Lutheran Church in our area. We've accepted the idea that churches are dying, and that in 50 years there aren't going to be any. We're not going to be a viable organization, and that allows us to do things. That allows us just to kind of use the resources up on ourselves. It allows us to create bureaucracies that are way too big. It allows us to do a bunch of stuff that, and I think on some level, we think we're on a sinking ship, and I don't buy that. I have the same kind of, it might be my builder mentality from the the place where I grew up, the summer vacations where I built stuff. But I really want to leave our synod in a place, and I want us to see our synod 20, 30, 40 years from now, not doing the kind of things that we did in the 1950s, because the world has radically shifted, right? Everything everywhere is going to change all at once. How do we get ready for some of those things? But the second part, merger is a congregational framework. You merge two congregations. I think we need to help people step beyond that into a network framework and talk about ministry in this area. Not just, it's as hard for people at the chapel to have this conversation as it is for other churches. But I think it's essential so that we see ourselves in ministry with other communities together in this area, and the network becomes as important as our siloed congregations. I think there are other churches that have more of a sense of this. I think Roman Catholics, for example, have more of a sense that they're together in this, not just one single parish, but they're together in a diocese in a way that it doesn't feel like we're together in our synod or even in our conference sometimes.
I think the Holy Spirit, Pastor Jeff, is doing something in the Lutheran Church right now, because this is exactly the stuff that me and Pastor Rustin Comer over at St. Matthew are talking about. And we're talking about how do we see each other as extensions of each other's ministry.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly it, Jeremy. That's exactly it. Pastor Sarah at Hope and El Sobrante, and Pastor Claire and Pastor D, we're all kind of talking about the idea of being part of a pastoral team.
Yeah.
We're pastors in small churches, all of us. We have small churches. We each have a church council, but we're already starting to talk about what does it mean to be a part of a pastoral team that has responsibility for an area.
Yeah.
That's a different kind of thing, right? And it's very evocative and very creative, and a bit experimental. So it should be exciting if we could have those kinds of conversations all over our synod.
Obviously there's going to be a plan going forward for a bishop's office, right? Hopefully you have thought about and it seems like we even need like a strategic plan. And so I don't want to know what the plan is, but like, how would you go about developing a strategic plan?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I think I would, we've done a series of strategic plans here at the chapel, and they're really good. Sometimes the problem with strategic plans is they're too far out, right? We take too long to do them, and they're too far out, and they end up living, on the shelf behind me, right? So and when somebody asks me what the strategic plan says, I go to the book to find it. Kind of like, most of us go to the book for our mission statement, right? We don't really know what the purpose is after the plan has gotten done. So I think we will be developing strategic plans, but I'm much more excited about the idea of us embracing this notion of experimentation in our synod with new and different relationships and networks, and trying new patterns for ministry that might be at the center of some strategic plan. But I think that notion is going to be a hard sell in our synod, and I think we have to work at it. I think we have to have conversation about what that might mean, because I think the other idea is that the synod office right now feels the location of the Synod office feels kind of disconnected from everything right now. And I think we need a Synod office that works with us. So I think it should be a Synod office that's in proximity to, maybe to the seminary, right? Maybe it's proximate to the seminary. Maybe there's shared space at the seminary for a Synod office where you don't go to the Synod office, you go to the Lutheran Center, right? Where there's a seminary, there's a Synod office, there's other stuff that's happening. So and I think we need a small, efficient, deeply motivated and engaged staff that can do what's needed to be done on a Synod level without stressing out the resources and the budget in a way that's just not going to work in the future. And we need to get used to that right now.
Mm-hmm. How do you how do you see envisioning, with something like that, with a localized Synod office? We are such a big area that we have people in Wairika, which is like the very top of the state, and people out in Nevada. How do you see kind of holding them with that?
Super great question. I do think that the answer to that question is different after the pandemic than it was before the pandemic. I think we are all online in a way now that we never were, and we weren't capable of, and we were afraid of before the pandemic. So the idea, it might have been an interesting idea before the pandemic to have encouraged Zoom meetings throughout the Synod, but nobody would have done it. Everybody would have been freaked out by the technology, and everybody would have complained about, the lack of in-person gatherings and all these things. I think post-pandemic, we understand the limits and we understand the capacity of online organizing. So I think that's a tool that the Synod can use, the Synod office can use. I also think that although there might be a central location where we have support staff and we have some desks and we have a space, the people who are staff for the Synod are going to be out in the Synod a lot. And to be out in the Synod doesn't mean you have to drive to Fresno to the office in Fresno, or drive to Sacramento to the office in Sacramento. You set up space in those locations on a regular basis for connection. You go to the places where the network is functioning, right? Or where the pastors are connecting, and the congregations are. So I think the Synod office has to relate to networks of congregations, to conferences. I think conferences can be more than simply political entities. They can be relational entities, more powerful entities than they have been to this point. I think we're moving in that direction. And I think the bishop and the Synod office need to relate strongly to them. There is a Synod office, but I expect the bishop and the staff, the staff for the office of the bishop, to be out and about a lot, where people are.
Let's continue this conversation about the Synod staff. What do you what sort of giftings do you think your staff is going to need to have to complement your own giftings?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm really interested in a staff team. So I'm interested in people who are collaborators and people who are efficient and organize, those are just kind of bland words, but people who can kind of get details done. I think we need to make some progress as a synod around some key issues. For example, mobility. It needs to be a little bit easier, right? For our mobility process, our first call process, the way candidates move from no job to a job, it has to be more efficient. So I'm interested in people who can think their way into changing some of these embedded processes in a way that are responsive to the needs of candidates, of clergy who need to move, and of congregations. I think that's another place we need to make some changes. There's when the Roman Catholic Church down the street, Newman, lost their priest 6 years ago. They lost their priest on a Sunday. They're a 2,000 member parish. Lost their priest on a Sunday, and the next Sunday they had a new priest who's been there, and that's how all the transitions at Newman have happened since I've been here at the chapel for 23 years, from one Sunday to the next, and they didn't skip a beat. Well, we might have different relationships with our pastors, and we might organize differently, and we might have a different kind of call process. But every time there's an interim, we don't have to kind of have these excruciatingly long waits between when a pastor leaves and when a new pastor comes, because what we sacrifice in those waits is momentum, and that's especially difficult for small churches. Small churches die in the midst of those extended transitions. Now, there are always exceptions, right? Congregations that need extra time, or they need to unhook from a pastor in order to kind of establish a new relationship with a new pastor, or there's some unhealthy patterns at work. But by and large, I think churches are moving. They're moving, they're on the move, and they need people just to kind of help them continue that. And our process feels a little Byzantine sometimes, a little so I would be interested in staff people who are interested in opening those things, opening those questions up, and not just doing what always has been done, because the church is a unique nonprofit organization, right? And it can have these opening it up and trying some new things to fix some of these problems. They're doing this in other synods. They're addressing wait time, and they're looking at the length of interims, and people are trying to take this seriously. I think we can do it as well. So
that's good.
One more thing is, I think our synod staff, I know that I lead with joy and enthusiasm, and but I think our synod staff needs to also. I think when synod staff shows up, they need to bring energy into the room, not drain energy from the room, but bring energy into the room, and not be the people who, we know to kind of shut down the conversations, but really be people who can open up possibilities for so in that sense we would share, I think, some of those leadership qualities, but I think I would expect that. I would expect synod staff, when they show up, to bring energy, to open up possibilities, to listen deeply, to build relationships.
It's good. One of the in addition to mobility, that what you talked about, one of the things, unfortunately, that you will have to deal with as bishop is conflict. How would you name your conflict resolution style? Or what is your conflict resolution style?
Yeah. That's a great question. There was a couple of years ago when we had a pastors gathering and all kind of professional leadership gathering, and we had a speaker who came in and who said, if all the Synod ever does is mobility and conflict, you're never going to address the real issues that we're dealing with, right? Because everything everywhere is changing all the time, or all at once. So I think there is a role for the Synod office in conflict mediation, but I think there are some boundaries around that role. I think for the Synod office to get involved in solving congregational or ministry conflict, I think is the wrong role for the Synod office. I think we have to make available conflict mediators, and we have to set up processes that people can engage, and they need to be serious about these processes, right? Congregations need to be serious about conflict resolution. I think between clergy, there's a song by the Brilliance, the group, the Brilliance, on their album called Brother, which there's a lyric. It goes something like, when I look into the eyes of my, and most Christians, I think, want to say neighbor, right? But their lyric says enemy. When I look into the eyes of my enemy and see my brother, I think we have conflict in our story, and our story doesn't tell us that we have to fix it necessarily. It says that we have to sit with it, we have to be in it, we have to expect it, we can't run from it, and we will discover siblings in the midst of this conflict where we have wronged one another, or where we are at odds with one another. Maybe we wouldn't use the term enemy, right? When I look into the eyes of my enemy, but there's the same kind of at oddsness among us that there is often. And so I think my conflict management style is to be direct. It's to encourage to not pretend, to tell the truth, and to have people move through it, not expecting it all just to be fixed or to go away, but expecting to discover siblings in the midst of the resolution. So I think that's where the promise lives, right? I think the promise lives in our willingness to see each other through and not give up on each other in the midst of really tough things. And I have experienced some tough things in our synod, and I am deeply, deeply grateful for the people who at one point may not have wanted to have anything to do with me, that they didn't give up on me, and similarly that I haven't given up on them. I haven't given up on the church or on the synod. And I think that's part of what defines us as church, is that we, even if we can't all individually do this, as a collective, we try not to give up on each other. And
I think that's really,
yeah.
Sorry, I cut you off. I just think that's beautiful.
Sorry.
But no, I think that's beautiful, Pastor Jeff, because I think you were being modest when you said you've had some tough things happen.
I thought the same
considering
thing.
I think everybody knows your story, and so I think that was really modest of you, and I really appreciated your answer. And I think, connecting that to how you envision staff bringing energy into a room, and being joyful and hopeful about things that I think there's a real connection there for you. I wonder if there's a connection, I should say. At least I see it. Okay, so we got like two like just questions, and these are more up to you to answer them how you want to, and then we're going to go into this kind of rapid fire questions. And
excellent. All right.
Okay, so I'm going to ask both of them at the same time, and you can just take them as you choose. What didn't we ask you that you feel like we should have, and what do you want us to know about you as it relates to being bishop? So answer those how you feel.
Yeah, is there something that you think we should have asked you? And then what do you want us to know about you?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm actually really glad that you didn't ask me what my favorite Bible passage was. But I expected you to, right? So I'm glad that you didn't. I might have expected, although I think it came out in my answers, you to ask some question about why church, period, right? Given that almost everybody I know at the university, or I know in this neighborhood, is a part of the nuns or duns community, right? They want nothing to do with the church, or they're done with the church, period, right? So they walk by, they love that we've repainted our building, right? So it's this bold, vibrant color, but they don't want anything to do with us or Newman or any of the other churches. So that why question, right? And it's connected to a lot of stuff that we were talking about. So I might have expected that. What was the second part of your question? I'm sorry about this. I'm brain dead right now.
No, it's all good. What do you want us to know about you as it relates to being bishop? What else besides our conversation do you just want us to know?
I think if you talk to people at the chapel who are really mixed about this possibility, because we really love working together, and we have loved working together, and we can envision working together for quite a while longer. So they're excited about this. The community feels, I think, appropriately honored in my nomination, which is really great, and they're really conflicted. But if you were to talk to them, they would talk about the energy, and I used the word joy before, but the energy and enthusiasm that I bring to this task of ministry. And I think I would bring that same energy to the task of bishop, because the church has made all the difference in my life, and I think it can make the difference in the lives of the duns and the nuns and everybody who really doesn't want to have anything to do with us, because we haven't been relevant and we haven't been trustworthy. And I think the church has because our story of God's unconditional loving kindness is so powerful, and this is the story that we see in Jesus, that we experience in the Eucharist, that we practice in reparations and forgiveness and confession. It's the story that causes us to try to find our siblings in the midst of conflict.
I know that for me, that joy has really shown in this conversation today from you. Our last segment, we're doing this with everybody, with anybody who we ever interview. Our rapid questions, there's going to be 10 of them, and whatever kind of comes to mind.
Right.
All right, Pastor Jeff, which food can you eat every day?
Sushi.
What's your favorite movie genre?
Drama, thriller, action.
Salty, sweet, or savory?
Savory.
In addition to the Bible, because every pastor will say the Bible, which book would you like with you on a deserted island?
Anything written by Eric Larson and his like little historical novels.
What fills your cup?
Oh, swimming.
What depletes your cup?
What depletes my cup? Too much talking, too much. Yeah.
What's your favorite holy place?
I think my favorite holy place is around the table when it's a thin space for me. It's when I'm connected to those I'm with and to those that have gone before and to those that are coming after.
What was one piece of good advice that you've been given?
Wow. To run to the courthouse and get this particular document and sign it immediately.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
What does rest look like for you?
Time with myself, time in silence, time in the forest, time like walking around the neighborhood, but it's mostly time and it's mostly quiet.
And lastly, what do you hope God will say to you when you enter the pearly gates?
I hope that I'll enter the pearly gates. I hope that I'll be admitted, and I actually never think about the pearly gates. So it's a fascinating question. This is the stumper of the day.
The last one.
The last one is the stumper. You know, I actually don't. I hope God does to me what my mother did the first time we saw each other after the pandemic. She didn't say a word. She just ran up and she embraced me in a way that we couldn't during the pandemic, right? We couldn't do that so it was 2 years that we hadn't done that, and she just embraced me. And I hope that's what God does at the pearly gates. No words necessary. Just, I want to feel that embrace.
Pastor Jeff Johnson, thank you so much for being a part of this podcast.
Josh and Jeremy, it's really, really great to see you. Thanks for the invitation, and blessings on the rest of your day.
Everybody, this has been the Serrano Brothers podcast. Thanks for listening.